this is why you suddenly want to spend time with your daughter? To exploit her and expose her to all manner of dangers? Kambu had moved to a beautiful big compound. He was looking plump and fresh, and Jeba, who was standing beside him, was even bigger than she had been a few short months ago. Kambu told Abela that he loved his daughter and had seen the error of his ways. Yes, she was helping him with his business, but she was well compensated for this. Abela scoffed. She looked around at the huts in Kambu's compound, the beautiful clothes Jeba was wearing, and the many goats and chicken that roamed about. Kambu was making good money and giving Rokamu, who was doing all the work, a small pittance. I do not care about your money. We have managed well with you being a good-for-nothing father. How dare you expose my daughter to such a dangerous undertaking as debt collecting? She's his daughter too. You can't stop him from seeing her. That is witchery, Jeba screamed. A brief but feisty argument ensued between the three, and in the end, Abela stormed off. Rokamu started crying when she was told she wasn't allowed to see her father again. But I don't mind, Mama, she said. Although Kambu only gave her a small fraction of what he earned, it was a real boon for them. Abela shook her head and said her decision was final. Over the coming days, Rokamu cried and moped. All she wanted was her father's love, and her heart ached that she wasn't allowed to see him. After a short while, Abela, who could not bear to see her daughter sad, backed down. Kambu could use Abela in her business, but she had to be better compensated. Kambu and Rokamu started their debt collecting business again. Clients flowed in like a gushing river in the rainy season, and soon Kambu was the richest man in Karombi, as the land was full of wicked debtors. Kambu increased the amount he was giving Rokamu, but not by very much, as he was a greedy man, married to a greedier woman. Kambu suggested that Rokamu should come and live with him, as it would make it easier for the business. He had a huge compound now, and she could live a luxurious life. Abela, seeing the joy in Rokamu's heart, reluctantly agreed. Now Kambu was the richest man in the village and had a huge hut that could easily accommodate Rokamu, but instead he placed her in one of the furthest huts in his compound, next to the pigs and goats. Jeba would not have her stinking up her beautiful hut. Rokamu was not allowed in the main hut and wasn't allowed to have dinner with the family. She tried playing with her siblings, but they shooed her away. You stink like 1,000 goats, Maga said, covering her nose. We can't play with you. Mommy said we are not allowed. Kambu worked his daughter ragged. All she did was work, and at the end of the day, cry herself to sleep in her small hut next to the animals. The only time she was allowed into the hut was when Abela visited. Kambu and Jeba would put on a show and pretend Rokamu was living with the family. When Abela asked if Rokamu was happy, she would force a smile and nod. The truth was that she was unhappy, but she had always grown up alone, without friends. Better to be with her father and siblings, even if they did ignore her most of the time. She also knew that her mother depended on the money she earned. If she knew how badly she was being treated, she would stop her from working, and she didn't want her mother to suffer. The years went past, and Rokamu learned to cope with her situation. She blossomed into a most remarkable beauty. She dreamed of meeting a man that would love and marry her, but knew it was impossible. While other girls had suitors, she ran away from men. Maga, who herself was a stunning beauty, was to be married. Rokamu watched the preparations enthralled. Kambu and Jeba were leaving no stone unturned for their daughter's wedding. They purchased 3 cows, bought the best fabrics, cleaned and decorated the compound. Rokamu helped with cleaning the compound and decorations. She was excited to witness her first wedding. A day before the ceremony, Kambu came to her and told her that she was to go and spend the day with Abela. Rokamu was devastated. She knew why they didn't want her around. She forced a smile and nodded. That night, Abela asked why she was looking sad, but Rokamu would not tell her. Kambu and Rokamu entered a village called Guda and went straight to the debtor's house. He was a wealthy man that owed quite a lot of money. They successfully collected the money and began making their way back to the hut where they would be spending the night, as it was too late to travel back to Karumbi. Suddenly they heard a loud trumpet that heralded the passing of the king of Guda. A crowd had started to gather along the narrow street, hoping to catch a glimpse of the king. Kambu told Rokamu to quickly move away from the crowd, afraid she would start smelling. The king of the Guda passed through with his guards. Kambu looked on in admiration. He was a tall, handsome man, bejeweled, and wearing a beautiful outfit and a gleaming crown. The king was eagle-eyed and noticed Rokamu standing far away from the crowd. She was the most lovely person he had ever seen, and he was instantly captivated by her. He also noticed a sadness in her lovely brown eyes that intrigued him. He whispered a command into his guard's ear. "Please, ask that lovely damsel if she would be kind enough to join me for dinner in the palace tonight." Rokamu nearly ran away as the guards approached her. As usual, she started emanating odors, and the guards covered their noses, looking around for where the smell was coming from. Rokamu was such a beauty, they did not think it could be from her. "Our king wants to see you later tonight," one of the guards said. Rokamu said that she could not make it and ran swiftly away to her father. The guards returned and told their king he was very disappointed. He was handsome and rich and not used to rejection. His curiosity was piqued. "She is a stranger from out of town," the guard said. "We got to talk to her father, and they are staying in a hut for tonight and will leave town tomorrow." That night, the king and one of his guards made their way to a hut in town that served as an inn for visitors. They met Kambu. He was surprised to see them and bowed his head in obeisance. "Good evening, stranger, and welcome to my kingdom," the king said. Kambu peered up at the king, his heart pounding. "Do not be afraid. I happened to see a beautiful flower on my stroll through town and learned she was your daughter. I would like the pleasure of her company if you don't mind." Kambu frowned. Rokamu was his cash cow, and he would never let go of her. He was about to say that she wasn't in, but then he had a thought. Why lie? Once he gets a whiff of her foul odor, he will run for his life. Kambu smirked as it gladdened his heart that she would never be married and would work for him for life. "Certainly," he said, bowing. "She is in the hut. You may go in," Kambu said, bowing to mask an evil smirk. The king smiled and entered the hut with his guard. Kambu smiled. "Soon they will come running out." A few moments later, the guard ran out and made for the bushes, vomiting. Kambu grinned. "Now for the king," he said to himself. A few minutes passed, then several minutes, and then an hour, and still the king did not come out. Kambu was puzzled. Why hadn't the king fled from Rokamu? Curious, he peeked into the hut, and to his surprise, he saw the king and Rokamu laughing and talking easily. Rokamu was startled when the king and the guard entered the hut. She recognized him and bowed, praying that she would not emit her odor, but of course she did. Soon the guard became nauseous and excused himself, running out of the hut. The king looked slightly irritated. He shrugged and started talking easily to Rokamu, who wore a stunned look. He didn't seem to mind the odor. At first, Rokamu was shy, but the king's easy manner put her at ease, and she found herself opening up. He was extremely handsome, and she wanted to keep on talking to him for as long as possible. "So, you are from Karumbi?" the king said, smiling. "Are all maidens from there as beautiful as you are?" Rokamu smiled. This was the first time any man had ever been able to remain with her for any length of time. Perhaps she wasn't smelling as badly as usual. Kambu's mouth opened and shut like a fish out of water when he saw the king chatting with Rokamu. The king sensed his presence and turned to him. "Your daughter is most delightful. Please stay a few more days at my palace. I would like to get to know her better and for her to meet my mother." Kambu was so astonished he could only nod dumbly. Rokamu, on the other hand, jerked back from her reverie. She didn't want to go anywhere near people, never mind in a palace. "Nonsense," the king said. "My mother and everybody else will love you." He was only partly right. While his mother welcomed Rokamu into the palace with a warm smile and hug, every other person immediately perceived a foul odor from the strange girl. The king and Rokamu retreated into a room for dinner, and immediately one of the king's advisors complained to his mother. "My lady, this woman that your son brings into the palace, she stinks." The queen mother frowned. She hadn't smelled it, and neither had her son. All she saw was a beautiful, shy girl. The palace courtier explained to her that every other person had smelled her a mile away, and the woman's stench was unbearable. The queen mother creased into a frown. She dismissed the advisor and joined the king and Rokamu. Rokamu looked up in fright when the queen mother came in. As usual, when she was afraid, she started smelling. It was only a matter of time before the queen mother chased her away. She thought sadly. A tear trickled down her cheek. The queen mother smiled sweetly at her and asked where she was from and what her mother's name was. Rokamu was stunned. First, the king hadn't seemed to mind her smell, and now the mother? What was going on? "My name is Rokamu, and my mother's name is Abela. We live in Karumbi, a village several days' walk away from here." When the queen mother heard this, her heart rate spiked. She reached out and hugged Rokamu tightly. Rokamu was stunned. This was the first time anyone other than her mother had given her a hug. "Do you love my son?" she asked, smiling kindly. Rokamu answered that she did. "Tomorrow you will go to Karumbi and bring your mother. Do not ask any questions. Just do it. Do not come with your father." A week later, Abela was looking around the lavishly furnished palace meeting room in astonishment. When Rokamu said she and the king had fallen in love with her, she placed her hand on Rokamu's forehead, checking for her temperature. Surely she had a fever. It took a while to convince her that she wasn't ill, and finally, Abela had agreed to make the journey. The queen mother breezed into the room with the king and burst into tears. She hugged a stupefied Abela. "Don't you recognize me? It is Jeddah from all those years ago in the Karumbi rubbish heap." Abela was stunned. When they had first met, Jeddah was a thin woman, always dressed in rags. She looked at the king. "Is that Bedigon?" Bedigon and Rokamu looked surprised. Abela and Queen Jada hugged and talked non-stop for minutes, while their kids, who had no recollection of themselves, looked on mouths agape. When we left Karumbi, we moved about here and there for a few years. Times were hard and we were often hungry and homeless. One day, a man came to see us in the village we were in. He was from our kingdom Guda. Badigon's uncle, the wicked king, had passed on to the afterlife, and it was safe for us to return to our village. To cut a long story short, when Badigon came of age, he was crowned the king of this kingdom. Gudar. Rokamu looked stunned. You mean we were childhood friends? Queen Jada smiled. You were inseparable. You both cried so much when you were parted. Rokamu stared at them all, mouth agape. But how come you are not affected by my smell? Aren't you repulsed? Queen Jada laughed. She explained to Rokamu that they had spent years living in the worst rubbish dump, sleeping, eating, playing in the refuse. Compared to that stench, she smelled like a rose. She took their hands and joined them together. It is fate that you are to be married. Your mother was the only one that was kind to me when I was living in the rubbish dump in Karumbi. You must stay with us and let's plan the wedding. And that is how the Rokamu married King Badigun. At first, the palace courtiers complained of the stench, but such was the love Badigun had for his queen, he moved everyone away from the palace. If they could not stand the queen's stench, then they could go, he said. Remember, viewers, what the wise old man had told Kambu's father many years ago. Rokamu's stench would go when she knew true unconditional love from a man. Well, no other man loved his wife the way Badigon did Rokamu. In a few short weeks, she was cured and smelled as sweet as roses, and the courtiers moved back into the palace. As for Kambu and Jeba, well, let's delve into that quickly. They were both bitter that their cash cow and moneymaker had left. Kambu, however, was the wealthiest man in Karumbi. You would think he would be set for life. But alas, when you earn your money in wicked ways, it will not stay, as money, as my people say, is a spirit. They were lavish in their spending and soon found themselves borrowing money to maintain their lifestyle. They borrowed from everybody and soon found themselves in a heavy debt. One day, a big man stood on their doorstep. He was with 3 other mean-looking men. My name is Kudus. I am a debt collector. I am here to take all you have: house, cows, money, and land.